All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Monday, May 1st, 2023 Transportation Commission meeting. We're going to get started with roll call attendance. David Ballard. Zachary Shoemaker.
Here.
Ryan Lancaster.
Present.
Walter Steed.
Here.
Zoom. Tracy Hopkins.
Present.
Stephen Lewis.
Here.
Tom Leclerc.
Present.
William Song.
Commissioner Song reported that he will likely be late.
Okay. John Wasson.
Wasson,
Yes.
present.
Leila Kloppenstein.
Present.
David Reinhardt. Alyssa Taysom.
Ms. Taysom is on Zoom. I just put her as a panelist so she can talk now.
All
I'm
right,
here.
Okay, you can, sweet. And Justin Price.
Here.
Right. We will then move on to the adoption of the agenda. Do I have any motions, any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
The motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Moving on to the adoption of the minutes of the April 3rd, 2023 Transportation Commission meeting. Do I have any comments or motions?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the meeting minutes from the April 2023 meeting. Second.
Motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on to old business transportation project update. Ms. Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Mr. Lancaster for approving the minutes as written for the first time. The project updates are bolded as per usual. I'll go through a few of those to highlight them and then stand for any questions. On the first page, I wanted to let you know that the integrated 5-year work plan, ACHD staff, oh, and I apologize, there's a typo there. ACHD staff presented their plan progress to their commission. And if you want to view that update, the link is there and the presentation starts in about the 50-minute mark. The Intersection and Pedestrian Safety Task Force is well underway, having had 3 meetings so far and beginning to review individual intersections to develop recommendations for improvements. The Linda Road Overland to Franklin is in its 75%, it's moving towards 75% design, and the task force has begun reviewing aesthetic decisions. Moving to page 10, the Chinden West corridor, the Locust Grove to Meridian segment is scheduled to be completed by early June, which will wrap up that project. And on the Highway 16 extension, phase 3 has begun, it is now in design, and there is an open public meeting that you can go to at that link there if you want to give input. And as always, I would encourage you to do that and provide any input you see on that design. And lastly, on page 12, the State Highway 55 road safety review didn't make it into this packet because it happened on Friday, but there was a meeting between staff on Friday, and I just wanted to inform you that that continues to be a discussion, and we're still discussing speed changes and whether that's what that might look like. And I can stand for any questions.
Commissioners, any questions? Mr. Leclerc?
That last item said,
I'm sorry.
last item talked about a report to council. Say when?
They have not committed to a date. ITD has not committed to a date yet, or we've not had a date scheduled yet for them to present to council.
Any other questions for Ms. Carson?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Lewis.
yeah, just a question on page 10 of the packet, on the Meridian downtown pavement and pedestrian improvements. Towards the bottom, it talks about West Fifth Avenue, formerly West Fifth Avenue, and I'm wondering if that's a typo.
That is a typo. It is, I'll get that corrected by the next meeting. It was either West Fifth, formerly West Sixth, or vice versa. So I'm not recalling right now which it said previously and which it is now, but it did change. I believe it went to West Sixth and it was formerly West Fifth, but I'll make sure I update that for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the celebration parking recommendation to council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the last meeting, there was a motion to recommend city council requests ACHD commission remove parking on the north side of East Cinema Drive as part of the discussion for the celebration development parking issues that were brought to the Transportation Commission. I drafted a memo to the council and that begins with the recommendation and some background information. And I do want to note that I got one request for an addition to that memo. And so I'll read that last paragraph that's on 15 and then stand for any questions or edits that this commission wants before this goes to council. So that last paragraph, Chair Steed had made a note that there was discussion of sightline problems leaving Harley-Davidson that were brought up by ACHD, and that this commission discussed those and did not think that was a good reason to remove parking. So in an effort to wordsmith that into the letter, the last paragraph will now read, the Transportation Commissioners discussed at length the risks and benefits of allowing parking on Cinema Drive, including that they do not share Director Wong's sightline concerns in regards to motorcycles leaving Harley-Davidson. And the rest of the paragraph will continue on as is written.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis.
I had two comments. One of them was already addressed by that correction that Miranda just said. The other one was on the first page, the location of the red dashed box in the figure. Looking at the figure versus the text, I think that the intersection mentioned is the one that leads into the south part of Sonic and into the Griddle parking lot.
You are correct, Commissioner Lewis. Thank you. I will get that corrected.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, John Wasson, ACHD.
Mr. Wasson.
If I heard Miranda properly, I believe she's in error. She said, remove the parking. It's in actuality, remove the parking restrictions.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I did, I said that wrong in the, I'll read the recommendation as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page. The Transportation Commission recommends that City Council send a letter to the ACHD Commission requesting the removal of the parking restriction on the north side of Cinema Drive.
That is correct as I read that. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns, feedback? All right. So would we want to continue holding this, or would we move to approve?
Don't know if we need an actual action since there was already a recommendation to send the letter. Do we need an action to approve the letter that's being sent, or can we just get a verbal?
Mr. Chairman. Well, isn't this recommendation going to the council?
Yes.
Well, well, previously we had a motion and voted. didn't we? Okay, all right. I think, so yeah, we just maybe by consensus. This letter looks good and let's forward it along with our recommendation.
Question for council. Does that sound kosher?
Yes, I agree. That's fine.
Mr. Chair, John Wasson, ACHD.
Mr. Watson?
Just a comment, and I'm not saying my director is right. I'm not saying you are right. But the effective change for this will result in 4 or 5 or 6 parking spaces. The problem that you have is you're trying to put 15 pounds of garbage in a 10-pound bag. And this is going to provide maybe a little bit of relief. It's not going to fix the problem. And so I think that going forward, we need to realize that they may be back saying, you didn't fix a problem. What are you going to do now?
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Leclerc?
Well, this was made even worse, as I understand the history. The first thing that has happened is that it was determined that there were too many site distance problems with the intersection with Celebration and Overland. So parking was lost there. Again, only 3 or 4 parking spots. This just gets us maybe to break even. Understood, it's still a parking nightmare around that facility, but it's just something. It's one of those things where we had an ordinance and it probably was incorrect at the rate of parking stalls per square footage at the time that Celebration Plaza was built, and then the later development came in that had a more robust parking requirement, and so now there's animosity between those 2 entities. Is that we have one big area with lots of empty stalls and another place that's overloaded every day. So anyway, that I think all we're trying to do is to make up for some of the lost spots because of the concern about safety on Overland, exiting, entering the street. So that's what I think we're trying to do. I don't think we're expecting this is a solution, but it's hopefully a mitigation to that as it is.
A question for council, and this is more academic in nature and maybe something that the original citizen who commented might be interested to know, just out of curiosity. I know the Hideaway has been, I haven't checked recently, but it's been listed for sale. Is there something in the code that determines a new occupant coming in and developing a cross, I'm forgetting the specific term, but a cross access, across parking agreement? Is there something in the code that governs that, or is there,
Mr. Councilman, I don't believe that we could impose a new restriction on an existing business. If the property was for sale, it would include the same lot and the same parking. So I don't believe any new.
Okay. Any comments? Do we have general consensus? I guess absent, a vote. Awesome. Seeing no further comment, and I don't see Sergeant Smith anywhere. So we'll move on to staff communications.
Mr. Chair, I apologize as well. Sergeant Smith did let me know that she wouldn't have any update for the meeting today. So
Thank you.
I meant to mention that at the adoption and I forgot it. So staff communications begins on page 16. This is a summary of relevant correspondence that I've received since the last meeting. Beginning on page 17, I wanted to point out that the concerns that we received on Ustick, Locust Grove, Yellow Peak, and Stormy, they were all based around the Pheasant Point neighborhood, which is why they're kind of all lumped under that title. But I wanted to let you know there were some updates on that. The Stormy Peak traffic calming was determined that it did not meet the volume for traffic calming consideration. And on Locust Grove to Chinden, it was evaluated that the speed is appropriate. And so that leaves issue 1 and the lighting on Locust Grove Fairview. So there is an evaluation in the next couple weeks on Ustick Eagle to Meridian. And as far as the lighting on Locust Grove from Chinden to Fairview, I'm working with our Public Works to see what can be done and when to alleviate some of the lighting concerns out there. And I might stop there to see if there's any questions on the first view before I move on. The next one there on 17 is the Transportation Improvement Program. Public comments are in your packet. There were 2 comments that specifically called out Meridian, and those were both comments that were in support of rail returning to Meridian. And then moving to page 26, there was discussion of the Meridian Broadway crosswalk timing, and that's being addressed between staff, planning staff, myself, and ACHD to see if there's any review that can be done of that timing. And then the last 2 items in the packet, there's an excerpt from a letter that was received from a resident in opposition to a development. That letter was received in 2022. And there was a follow-up letter sent in April of 2023 regarding concerns of a new development and the stress that it will put on Ustick and Venable. And I included that in your packet, not because I think there's a lot of room for the Transportation Commission to sway where developments happen, but because if that development goes through, I think it's something that the commission should be watching for the prioritization subcommittee and whether that intersection will need improvements with the newer capacity or will need a better capacity with the newer traffic. And the last one is a similar issue, Black Cat Franklin to Cherry, with the developments that have been going on there. There's an excerpt from the minutes from a recent city council meeting of Councilman Kavner noting that there may be a need to accelerate the Black Cat improvements that are in our prioritization list between Franklin and Cherry based on the new development. So those 2 items, I can stand for any questions, but those last 2 I mentioned kind of segue into the next agenda item. But at this point, I'll stand for any question on any of the other or any of the staff communications.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lancaster?
So Miranda, going back to the top of page, I don't know, the Meridian and Broadway crosswalk. So I've been here long enough to see some of these things return, and this is one of them. So I guess what has changed since last time?
There is construction downtown on Broadway. There is a new apartment complex that has gone up. I don't know that they would necessarily be using that crossing. What else has changed downtown? Yeah, those are the only 2 things I can really think of that have changed drastically since the last time this was brought forward.
Okay, Mr. Chairman and Miranda, I guess, let me try to rephrase that question. So it says that it's a concern from City Hall employees. So not necessarily the new construction or development nearby. I remember we had the same conversation a few years ago. So what is desired to happen this time?
Yeah, so what's desired from the employees that have reached out to me is, well, they didn't necessarily say what they wanted. They just said that the wait was too long and the cross time wasn't long enough. So then I assume that they want a longer crossing time and a shorter wait. So I did my staff role to pass that on to ACHD to see if that's realistic in that location. I don't know that you're asking for my opinion, so I'll stop there.
Mr. Chairman, another comment on this one. So this is, I remember saying this before and I'll say it again, but this is a classic example of land use affecting transportation, right? In this case, the city's choice of how to use land is affecting transportation. So in this case, the ability of employees to get to and leave work, and how that affects the vehicular users of Meridian Road. So, I guess it's a case in point that land use affects transportation and vice versa. And, even the city is not above that.
Mr. Chair, John Wasson, ACHD.
Awesome.
Two things I'd like to, or at least one thing I'd like to mention is that signal is timed at about 3 feet per second. So from the time the white person shows up on the indicator saying to cross, you have X number of seconds to cross that at 3 feet per second. The thing that people don't understand is after about 3 or 4 seconds, the indicator vanishes and then it goes into the countdown mode. And people think that they're not supposed to cross. They can cross. However, they can't step off the curb to cross. They can continue to cross. So what that means is pedestrians have to pay attention to the indicator and be prepared to step off when the indicator goes off. And similar to drivers, if they're not paying attention when the light turns green, they could lose their turn to make a left-hand turn because they missed that green arrow and now it's a red arrow.
Thank you. Any other?
Mr. Chairman, just to comment, I remember when it was first put in and the pedestrian push buttons would actuate a crossing every time that it was requested and immediately. And the complaints back then were from the drivers saying, well, you're backing up traffic all the way to Cherry Lane when you allow that to happen during peak hours. So then ACHD put that pedestrian signal in the same coordination as the rest of the signal. So that the pedestrians have to wait their turn to get the crossing, just like every other side street along the corridor. So that wait is probably making some people upset.
Understandable. Sometimes you have zero-sum situations. Someone's got to wait. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Steed.
Walter Steed, on the use ticket vulnerable traffic signal item on page 26. A question for Miranda, if I may.
Yes.
Have the developments that are mentioned in that section all been approved by the city?
Mr. Chair, I believe it's only one development that's actually being opposed.
But
I
that
think
develop-
she
but that development
mentions
has-
other,
but that development has been approved by the city.
I'm not sure, Mr. Chair. I apologize.
If I may, my question is, if the developments that are being challenged by the person in that report to us have been developed, then the question is, should have, or why didn't the city call for a traffic signal at Ustick and Venable? If they have not been approved, it would seem to me like they still have the opportunity to do that should it be warranted.
Mr. Chairs. There is a note that the resident has communicated with ACHD that there's a plan to put in a stoplight there. Or I apologize, I misread that. You're correct, Mr. Chair. Mr. Steed, I don't know if they've actually planned that or not. I know typically ACHD will ask developments to either make those improvements or put funds towards those improvements, similar to how we've talked about with the Black Cat Gondola crossing. In this particular location, I'm not sure what actions or plans they have in that location.
If I may, Mr. Chair, Miranda, I would suggest that you look into this just a little bit to see exactly what the approval level and situation is, the timing on that. If it's all been approved, then it's a matter of appealing to ACHD to take a look at it, either pre-finishing the development or when the development's finished to see if it's warranted. If it's not all been approved, then you're back a step to where it could be questioned whether or not one might be warranted. I'm not trying to force a traffic signal in where it's not warranted, but the citizen seems to believe that it's going to be a real mess if one isn't put in, and just need to get the engineers to take a look and see if they agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steed. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I do want to, I see Sergeant Smith has joined us. Ms. Carson said, you mentioned there weren't any updates. I want to just give you an opportunity if there's anything's changed since then.
Hi, Mr. Chair. First, I want to apologize for being late. I got tied up on something else, but no, sir, I don't believe that I have any updates for you at this time.
Thank you very much. Color me shocked. Our police department has plenty going on. Any questions for Sergeant Smith? Awesome. Seeing none, we'll move on to new business, transportation prioritization subcommittee. Next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I mentioned at the end of staff communications, those are two areas that the prioritization subcommittee may want to consider including or moving in the list. We've also talked about a handful of other locations that may need to be added or moved in the list. So as that project considerations list grows, it's a catalyst for me to ask you all what you think the next steps are for that prioritization subcommittee. I know there was a desire last year to start the process earlier. I expect to get the request from ACHD in around November is when I usually receive that. So I just need to wanted to prompt you for what that subcommittee wants to do and when they want to start that process.
Thank you. As chair of the subcommittee, my thoughts are, my initial thought is I'd like to have a more thorough coverage, at least of those top 10, top 15 kind of items, more thorough coverage of each of those before we get into the actual kind of end of year request period. And then also just kind of some coverage of any new items that have been added or requests like we see in the staff communications around requests from city council or citizens to increase, prioritize or deprioritize things. I think what tends to happen, even when we try to be proactive, some things change. We're waiting for some stakeholder feedback and for different perspectives, and then it's kind of all the last month or two is when we're really able to kind of figure out and flesh some things out. So anything we can do to get coverage of, especially the things that are kind of coming up in in comments in other meetings, in council meetings. That's always a positive to me. I think that's at least covering kind of the more, I don't know if hot button issues is the right word, but something that people care about specifically. Those are just my thoughts. Rest- Comments, concerns?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hopkins?
I'm not sure without the data that we get when they have send out the request. I mean, how quickly, Miranda, can you get the stuff from the county highway? Has the November,
Mhm.
we gotta do this all over.
It's fair. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Hopkins, I can ask ACHD, Christy Inselman, when those scoping notes are available, because largely it's the scoping notes is what they return to us for projects that weren't previously programmed. The projects that are already programmed, the scoping notes don't generally change. Projects that were not programmed, you may have additional scoping notes, and then you may have some design year and construction year changes. The design year and construction year changes, I would think those would be available now. The scoping notes won't be until ACHD finishes those, but I could definitely reach out to Ms. Inselman and see what her timeline is for those notes.
I think we had someone else. Mr. Lancaster, do you have a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say, since you're the chair of this subcommittee and the rest of the subcommittee is sitting down at this end of the table, if you call a meeting, I imagine we'll meet, but it seems like at this point we can talk about wish list and that's about it. And that's probably okay at this point too. So.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think I'd like to, Miranda, if we could get in contact. I think what might be helpful is trying to kind of figure out the non-data, the non kind of speaking to engineers. It's not always the the preferred discussion topic, but kind of seeing some of these things, these requests, how significant is that there is, I think to me, an aspect of public input that should be considered in these. If the public is very passionate about a specific area and feels it's very unsafe, et cetera, I think that warrants some discussion. So I think that those are the kinds of things that probably I want to discuss, so we have those kind of on the table. And then when that data comes, we can have that robust discussion, get straight to that. Miranda, did you have?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I should also note that any new projects that we're adding to the list, ACHD won't have scoping notes on those. So there are a few projects, and I don't have the considerations list in front of me. There are a few projects on that project considerations list that were new. And so if the subcommittee met to discuss those new ones in, say, August or October, then those could be discussed before we get the actual notes from ACHD as well.
I think that's probably a pretty good plan. Meeting sometime in August, touch base, determine kind of that gives us some more time for any staff communications to come in and for us to look at those kinds of things, and then have a touch base on those new projects, on kind of any renewed public concern for any existing projects, kind of get that discussion and touch base on there, and then see if we need to meet another time or two before November. Does that look? I want to pay equal attention over here, but since the subcommittee is basically right here, I want to. Are there any concerns? Any thoughts? All sound good,
Chairman,
Mr. Leclerc?
on the sidelines, but it seems like we have had some more feedback from the public on some of these areas that might become problem areas. And it might be worth it to have you have kind of a review of that over the last 12 months, because some of those projects may not be on the list, even though we've heard complaints about them. Sidewalk here, a signal light here, a crossing light there, intersection widening over here. We just hear, it seems like we're hearing all these, we're getting all this buzz, and then is it, I think staff is packaging those events into projects. But kind of a review of what the public's been telling us from these meetings, and what, if any, projects could be generated. Maybe they don't make the top 10, but they get on the list. And so that's maybe if you're planning to make decisions in August, maybe you need a July one. But there's time to think about all this. That might be a separate ask.
Makes sense. And that could be something as simple as, Ms. Carson working with, staff to kind of collate all of those concerns. Like we
Yes.
have these 3 here or
Mr.
so.
Chair, if I may, the project considerations list that I keep mentioning is exactly that. Anytime that a resident comes here and there's a tangible improvement that can be made for what they're requesting, I put it in the list, whether it's realistic or whether it's something that we actually want done is something that I will leave up to that subcommittee. But if there is some tangible improvement that could be made, I put it on the list. Maybe it's a crosswalk and then we go to the committee and we say there's a crosswalk 10 feet down the road. That doesn't make sense and it gets kicked off. But I'm not making those decisions in a vacuum. I'm just adding them to the list. Just so this group knows the workflow of where those requests go.
Very much. Any other questions, concerns, comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Ordinance and Development Subcommittee report. Mr. Leclerc.
Yes, our committee met today, and Commissioner Steed got some help from the Transportation Department staff and broke down in Ada County per capita crash rates, and broken down if it was on a 25 mile an hour. This is all related to the lowering of the speed limit, which might be a recommendation. And so anyway, that Ace was gonna step in. I'll try to wrap it up. So anyway, he had some crash rates. Surprisingly, Meridian's crash rates were the lowest, even though there are some communities with a lower speed limit. But we digging into pedestrian numbers and we see the accident rates are often more serious in a 25 mile an hour zone than in a 20 mile an hour zone. So we want to study this some more. We're also interested in travel time impacts and probably some more pedestrian breakdown. We want to meet on June 5th again at 2:30, and if we can't get a recommendation made at that time. That's the quick update. ITD had another comment. They're welcome.
Mr. Leclerc, are there any questions or comments? ITD or any other commissioners?
Okay. So then the other things we had quick reports. Zach's been attending the intersection safety committee. We had other updates from that in the agenda today, and it's pretty much what he explained. I don't know if. Well, I think this was news. We heard that the council had found $1.5 million to upgrade the LED lighting at many of these intersections to improve the visibility of these pedestrian control devices or signage. And so that is moving forward. That's pretty good. That's good to hear information. And then I'm on the, is there anything else on intersection safety?
Mr. Chair, if I can provide one point of clarification.
Ms. Carson.
There is a budget recommendation proposal. There's a budget proposal for $1.5 million for citywide street lighting, not just at the intersections. Then there's also discussion of if the intersections could be upgraded faster than the next year when that $1.5 million gets implemented. So those are two separate efforts that the $1.5 million is not just for intersections, and it doesn't start until council approves the next budget for next year.
Thank you, Miranda. That's good. But anyway, it's good news. The third area, I'm on the parking downtown destination downtown parking committee as well. We kind of had a, what is parking management? What do those people do? What do consultants think of when they think of an optimum parking turnover rate and all that sort of stuff? And there was some discussions too of, and it's kind of in the fog, but it's related to our subject out at Celebration. Even though it's not downtown, I think we're going to use it as an example for us, because it's a situation where the rules changed, and then we have sort of different parking situations right next door. And they talked about in the destination downtown about how in some places the cities have facilitated, there's no ordinance or anything, but they have someone on staff who knows what to do. If a couple building owners come in and say, we've got spaces, our reality of our parking is that it's not fully utilized. And these guys next door are always overloaded. And we want to lease 10 spots to them. And so we get a little more money each month. Maybe we put a sticker on the cars that are permitted, and we don't tow those cars, and everybody's happy. And so this is, I think we'll hear more about this concept as we go along, and it might be something that's a helpful tool for us to have, but I'm not real clear on how it would be implemented or formalized. Because it's basically a private contract. But I think if folks are unaware of it, if I was about to buy that, if Jared's saying that hideaways may be changing owners, that might be a factor in monthly income that we wouldn't have penciled in before if you were aware of it. So anyway, that's the types of stuff we're doing in that group. And again this month. I'll have reports as we go all year long. I think there's going to be 10 or 11 meetings over the next 11 or 12 months. So that's the parking. Any other questions about that? All right, that concludes my reporting. I covered the next item on the agenda too.
Yeah, two birds, one stone. Mr. Leclerc is efficient today. Do you have any questions or comments about either the ordinance and development subcommittee meeting or the destination downtown parking commissioners?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Carson.
before we move on to item number 10, if I can circle back a little to staff communications, Mr. Wasson has a few updates for some staff communications we've received in the past for some traffic calming items, if the chair would allow him those.
Yeah, absolutely, go for it.
John Wasson, ACHD. Traffic calming on Ashton was reviewed by the commission 2 weeks ago at the meeting. They were required to have 23% cut through traffic. When we evaluated it, they were 5%, give or take a little bit. The commission that made a decision to grant them an exception of policy So we're working to provide funding to put in, I believe it's going to be 5 speed cushions. They will go in as cushions based upon input from Deputy Chief Bongiorno. So we may hear about people driving down the middle of the road, but I'm not overly concerned with that. We had a request for traffic calming on Montague between Rome and Zaldia. They met the volume criteria. They did not meet the speed criteria. I provided them with a petition. I received a call from the applicant today asking me to close it out. There is insufficient interest in the neighborhood to proceed with traffic calming. In that case, the primary generator is why people move there. It's a school. There's a school out there. So speeds are a little high. I mean, 29 in a 25 zone for 85%. But the volume is 240 vehicles in a peak hour. And that's because mom and dad are taking kids to school. And that's unlikely to change with traffic calming. Also, Tybalt from Montague over to the west. The applicant last month contacted me, said she'd have the petition back to me by the end of April. She has not, so that request will also be closed out. So 1 gets a thumbs up and 2 are closed down because the requesting person can't get neighborhood buy-in for traffic calming.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Wasson? Seeing none, do I have to open that MDC? Okay, so we'll just skip straight to item 10. July meeting date. I believe I heard that the meeting is technically on the 4th of July, which patriotic as I am, I don't know. If I'm
So, Mr. Chair, with most government holidays, if it falls on a Friday or a Saturday, it gets moved to a Monday or, if it falls on a weekend, it either goes to a Friday or Saturday. This year, 4th of July is on Tuesday, so the government holiday for 4th of July will be on Tuesday. This commission meeting would be on July 3rd, immediately preceding that. That said, it's not uncommon in past years for this commission to have plans for 4th of July, very patriotic bunch. And so I just wanted to check in and see if we needed to change the date for the July meeting or cancel the July meeting. This is a conversation that we have every year, and so thought now was a good time to bring it up.
Commissioners, any thoughts about either pushing it probably to the 10th or canceling it?
The 10th would be good, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any concern, feedback around pushing that to the 10th?
Walter Steed, I'd be in favor of the 10th.
Looks like everyone, I mean, do we need a motion for that?
I will need to check if the room is available. So I wouldn't say that you need to make a motion now. I can check if the room's available and then we can do that formal move next month.
Okay. 10th. Okay. Any other comments? Concerns? Seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
A motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yeah, see you next month.